The Portal Stones. Chapter 1. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the whispering woods, each gust a mournful sigh that carried an unnatural chill. Within this eerie expanse, three figures moved cautiously through the shadows. Gumus, a broad-shouldered warrior whose chainmail glinted faintly in the moonlight. Drea, a slender sorceress whose dark eyes shimmered with latent magic. And Arkin, a nimble scout who seemed to blend into the forest itself, his every movement deliberate and silent. Gumus walked slightly ahead, his shield raised and sword at the ready. His sharp green eyes scanned the woods for any sign of movement. Though he carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned fighter, there was an unease in his steps, a tension born of the forest's sinister whispers. Behind him, Drea clutched her staff tightly, the faint hum of magic surrounding her as she muttered a quiet incantation to ward off the oppressive gloom. It was Arkin who first sensed something amiss. He raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. Dropping to one knee, he pressed his fingers against the cold, damp ground, his brow furrowing. "Something's wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wailing wind. "The ground. It's trembling." Gumus tightened his grip on his sword, stepping protectively in front of Drea. Trembling. Could it be an ambush? His voice, though calm, carried an edge of readiness. "No," Arkin replied, shaking his head. "This is something else, something unnatural." The trio pressed forward cautiously, the vibrations beneath their feet growing stronger with every step. As the dense trees gave way to a small clearing, they saw it, a massive, ancient tree standing at the center, its gnarled roots spreading like claws across the forest floor. Nestled within the roots were stones, their surfaces pulsating with an otherworldly light. The air around them was thick with energy, each pulse accompanied by a faint crackle, as though the stones themselves were alive. Drea's eyes widened, and she stepped forward almost instinctively, drawn to the stones. "I've never felt anything like this," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. Her fingers hovered over the nearest stone, hesitant yet compelled. "The power, it's overwhelming." "Careful," Gumus warned, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Ignoring his caution, Drea reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of one of the stones. The moment she made contact, a surge of energy raced through her, bright arcs of magic sparking at her fingertips. She gasped, but instead of pulling away, she pressed her palm firmly against it. "I feel connected to them," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "These stones hold immense power. They could be ancient relics." Gumus frowned, his protective instincts flaring. "And power like that often comes with danger. We shouldn't rush into anything." Arkin stepped closer, his expression guarded. "We don't even know what they're for, Drea. These stones could be a trap, or worse, a weapon." Drea turned to them, her gaze intense. "I can't explain it, but I know these stones are important. They're calling to me." Her fingers curled around one of the stones, prying it loose from the roots. It was warm to the touch, almost too hot to hold, and it pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to echo in her very heartbeat. Gumus exchanged a wary glance with Arkin before sighing and nodding. "Fine," he said gruffly, "but we stay on guard. If these things bring trouble, we leave them behind." The stones, though small, seemed unnaturally heavy, and Drea clutched them tightly to her chest, as if afraid to let them go. Even Arkin, usually unfazed by strange phenomena, couldn't shake the feeling that the stones were watching them, their glow pulsing in time with the whispers of the forest. As they turned to leave the clearing, Drea glanced back at the ancient tree, a shiver running down her spine. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure, tall, shadowy, with glowing yellow eyes, watching them from the edge of the woods. When she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the unending whispers and the faint hum of the stones. Chapter 2. Evil Rising. Emerging from the oppressive gloom of the Whispering Woods, Gumus, Drea, and Arkin stumbled into the soft glow of dawn. Before them lay a small village nestled in a valley, its cobblestone streets and thatched rooftops once promising peace and safety. But the idyllic facade shattered as they drew closer. The air carried the stench of blood and smoke, and the once vibrant village was now a graveyard of crumbled homes and charred remains. Gumus's knuckles whitened as he gripped his sword. "What happened here?" he murmured, though he already feared the answer. The faint sound of shuffling drew their attention. From the shadows of a collapsed barn emerged a figure, an old woman, her frail body trembling, her face streaked with soot and tears. She clutched a blood-stained shawl to her chest as she stumbled toward them. You must help," she rasped, her voice cracking with desperation. "The devils, they came from the north." Drea rushed to steady the woman, her hands glowing faintly as she murmured a soothing spell. "Breathe," she urged gently. "Tell us what happened." The woman's wild eyes darted between them, as though the words themselves might summon the horrors she had witnessed. "They overran the fort," she whispered. "A legion of them, slaughtered everyone. No one could stand against their leader." "Who?" Gumus demanded, his tone sharp. "Who is their leader?" The woman's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "Gazroth, a devil unlike any other, red-skinned, horned, with eyes that burned like the pits of hell. He rides a beast of shadow, and his blade, it drinks the souls of those it kills." Arkin, ever the pragmatist, knelt beside her, his brow furrowed. "Why the fort? What are they after?" "They're summoning something," the woman choked out, clutching Drea's arm for support. "A portal to the 9 hells. He's bringing his armies here." Drea's breath caught as the woman's words sank in. She glanced down at the glowing stones in her hands, their rhythmic pulsing eerily familiar. A realization clawed its way into her mind, chilling her to the core. "These stones," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They resonate with the same energy. They're connected to the portal." Arkin's eyes narrowed. "You're saying these stones are part of the portal's magic?" "Yes," Drea whispered, her voice steadier now. "But they don't just channel power, they can control it. If we use them correctly, we could seal the portal." Gumus turned to her, his expression grim. "Then we have no choice. We have to face Gazroth. If that portal opens—" The thought hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. The 9 hells unleashed upon the material world, countless lives consumed by fire and shadow. Drea's jaw tightened, her fear replaced by determination. "We can't let that happen. These stones are the key. We can stop him." Arkin stood, scanning the horizon with a cold, calculating gaze. "The fort is north of here," he said. "If we move quickly, we might be able to reach it before Gazroth completes the summoning." Gumus placed a hand on the old woman's shoulder. "You've done enough," he said softly. "Stay here. Rest. We'll handle this." The woman's tear-filled eyes met his, and she nodded weakly. "May the gods go with you," she whispered. The trio turned toward the distant hills, their path clear but fraught with peril. The village behind them was a silent testament to the stakes of their mission. Gazroth and his army awaited, but so did the chance to stop the portal and prevent the nightmare from spreading. As they set off, Drea clutched the stones tightly, their warmth a reminder of both their power and their responsibility. The weight of the world pressed upon their shoulders, but they moved forward with unwavering resolve. They would not fail. They could not fail. Chapter 3. Journey to the Fort. The journey to the fort was nothing short of grueling. The landscape stretched out like a nightmare brought to life. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and deep ravines carved perilous paths through the terrain. The air, thick with sulfur, clung to their lungs, making every breath a struggle. Overhead, the sky churned with dark clouds, illuminated sporadically by flashes of crimson lightning. Devil scouts prowled the area, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. These winged creatures of shadow and flame darted through the undergrowth with unnatural agility. Their glowing eyes pierced the gloom, searching for any sign of intruders. Arkin, ever vigilant, crouched low, his keen eyes scanning their surroundings. "They're everywhere," he whispered. "If we're not careful, they'll alert Gazroth before we even reach the fort." Drea nodded, her fingers crackling with residual electricity from her last spell. Moments earlier, she had unleashed a bolt of lightning that had obliterated a scouting party of devils. The blast had left a smoldering crater and sent a shockwave through the hills. Now she felt a pang of regret as she noticed Arkin's disapproving gaze. "Impressive," Arkin admitted, though his tone carried a hint of reproach. "But we cannot afford to be reckless. Gazroth is no ordinary foe. Every spell, every action must be calculated. We can't waste our strength on skirmishes." Gumus, walking slightly ahead, stopped and turned to them. His expression was serious, his green eyes reflecting the flickering light of the distant flames. "Arkin's right," he said. "Charging in without a plan is a death sentence. Gazroth's forces are powerful, and the fort is likely crawling with his minions. We need to be smart." Drea exhaled sharply, her frustration evident. "I know," she said, "but the closer we get, the more I feel the pull of these stones. It's like they're reacting to the portal. We can't waste time." "We won't," Gumus assured her, his voice steady. "But we also can't fail. We only get one chance at this." The three pressed on, their movements cautious but determined. The ground beneath their boots shifted unpredictably, as though the earth itself resented their presence. The air grew heavier, thick with the acrid stench of burning sulfur and the guttural roars of unseen creatures in the distance. Every sound, every shadow, was a potential threat. As they crested a ridge, the fort came into view. It was a towering monstrosity of black stone, its walls jagged and uneven, as if carved from the very essence of darkness. Crimson banners bearing the sigil of Gazroth, a horned skull engulfed in flames, hung from its battlements, flapping in the hot, unnatural wind. The structure loomed against a blood-red sky, its silhouette a harbinger of doom. The group stopped to take in the sight. Drea's breath hitched at the oppressive aura emanating from the fortress. The stones in her satchel vibrated more intensely now, their heat seeping through the fabric and into her skin. She clenched her fists, steeling herself. Arkin crouched low, surveying the fort with narrowed eyes. "Guards on the walls," he observed, "and more patrols below. No way we're walking in unnoticed." Gumus adjusted his grip on his sword and shield. "Then we make a distraction. Drea, can you create an illusion, something to draw them away from the gates?" "I can," she said, her voice resolute, "but it won't hold them for long." "It doesn't have to," Arkin interjected. "Just long enough for us to slip through a weak point in the defenses. There's a section of the wall near the west side. It looks less fortified." Drea nodded, already formulating a plan. "Then let's move quickly. Every moment we delay, Gazroth's forces grow stronger." The group descended into the valley, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a tangible force. As they approached the fort, the air itself seemed to hum with malevolence, a grim reminder of the battle that awaited them. Each of them knew the odds were against them, but failure was not an option. The fate of their world depended on their success. Chapter 4: Infiltration of the Fort. The narrow tunnel beneath the fort's foundations was dark and oppressive, its damp walls pressing in on all sides. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and sulfur, and faint echoes of monstrous growls reverberated through the labyrinthine passageways. Arkin led the way, his movements silent and deliberate, his keen eyes scanning every shadow for signs of danger. "This tunnel feels like it was never meant for human passage," Gumus muttered, his voice low but carrying a note of unease. His broad shoulders barely fit within the confines of the cramped space, and his chainmail scraped against the walls with every step. Drea, walking close behind him, clutched the glowing stones tightly. Their warmth was a small comfort in the cold, stifling darkness. "If this leads us closer to Gazroth without being seen, then it's worth the discomfort," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her nerves. Arkin halted abruptly, raising a hand to signal silence. He crouched low, his sharp hearing picking up the faint shuffle of footsteps ahead. "Patrol," he whispered. "2, maybe 3 devils. Stay close to the walls. We'll take them quietly." As the sound grew louder, the faint glow of hellfire torches illuminated the grotesque figures approaching. The devils were smaller than Gazroth's hulking lieutenants, but no less menacing. Their leathery wings folded behind them, and their molten eyes glowed with malice. Before the devils could react, Arkin struck. He emerged from the shadows like a specter, his twin blades flashing in the dim light. His long sword found the neck of the first devil, severing its head with a single fluid motion. The creature crumpled silently to the ground. The second devil hissed in alarm, raising its claws to strike, but Gumus was already charging forward. His shield slammed into the creature with bone-crushing force, sending it sprawling. Before it could recover, his short sword drove into its chest, extinguishing the hellish glow in its eyes. The third devil, sensing its doom, attempted to flee, but Drea's magic was faster. She raised her hand, and a crackling bolt of lightning shot forth, striking the creature in the back. It convulsed violently before collapsing in a heap of smoldering flesh. "Efficient," Arkin murmured, wiping his blades clean. "But we're running out of time. The deeper we go, the more resistance we'll face." Drea nodded, her breathing heavy. "We can't stop now. These stones—" She held them up, their glow pulsating in sync with her heartbeat, "are growing hotter. We're close to the portal." As they pressed onward, the tunnel began to widen, its oppressive walls giving way to a cavernous space. Here the air was thick with malevolent energy, and the faint sound of chanting echoed through the darkness. The guttural, infernal language sent chills down their spines. "They're preparing for something," Gumus said, his voice tense. "We need to hurry." The cavern was far from empty. Patrols of devils lingered near the walls, their twisted forms illuminated by the dim glow of lava pools scattered across the floor. At the center of the cavern, a large iron door barred their way. Strange glowing runes were etched into its surface, pulsating with an ominous red light. "Those runes," Drea whispered, "they're warding magic. Breaking through that door won't be easy." "We'll deal with it when we get there," Arkin said. "But first, we need to clear the room." The group moved as one, each falling into their roles seamlessly. Arkin struck from the shadows, dispatching lone devils with surgical precision. Gumus charged into clusters of enemies, his shield and sword a deadly combination of defense and offense. Drea, standing at a distance, unleashed bolts of lightning and arcs of electricity that chained through the devils, reducing them to ash. The fight was brutal and exhausting. For every devil they struck down, 2 more seemed to take its place. The trio's movements became slower, their breaths more labored. Yet they fought on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. Finally, the last devil fell, its charred body collapsing near the glowing iron door. The chamber was silent except for the heavy breathing of the three companions. Drea stepped forward, studying the runes on the door. "These are tied to the portal," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "If I can disrupt the magic, we can get through." "Do it," Gumus said, positioning himself in front of her, shield raised. "Arkin and I will cover you." As Drea began to channel her magic, the air around them grew heavy with anticipation. They all knew this was just the beginning. Beyond that door lay the portal and Gazroth. Chapter 5. The Portal Chamber. The portal chamber was a nightmare made manifest. The immense cavernous space seemed to warp reality itself, the air vibrating with an oppressive, chaotic energy. Every surface was slick with blackened soot, and veins of glowing magma snaked along the walls, casting the chamber in an eerie crimson light. At its center, the swirling vortex of fire and shadow dominated the space, pulsating with malevolent intent. The portal crackled and roared like a living entity, tendrils of darkness lashing out sporadically, leaving scorch marks on the stone floor. The vortex wasn't just a gateway, it was a wound in the fabric of the world, and its hunger was palpable. Drea stepped forward hesitantly, the portal stones in her trembling hands radiating with increasing intensity. She could feel their connection to the vortex, their resonance harmonizing with its chaotic rhythm. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "These stones, they're the key," she said, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Artifacts of immense power. They can either seal or open dimensional gates. Gazroth is using them to draw energy from the Nine Hells and widen the portal." The realization struck the group like a thunderclap. Gumus tightened his grip on his sword, his jaw clenched. "Then we stop him here and now, whatever it takes." Arkin, scanning the chamber with sharp eyes, pointed toward the base of the portal. "There's an altar there, feeding energy into the vortex. That must be where Gazroth's ritual is anchored. If we destroy it, or disrupt it, we can stop this madness." But before Drea could respond, a chilling voice echoed through the chamber, sending shivers down their spines. "You dare to interfere?" The voice was deep and guttural, laced with malice. From the swirling shadows above, Gazroth descended like a harbinger of doom. His massive form was clad in obsidian armor, etched with infernal runes that seemed to pulse in time with the portal. His crimson skin glistened in the fiery glow, and his smoldering yellow eyes burned with fury. He sat astride a black devil horse, a monstrous steed wreathed in flames, its hooves sparking with hellfire as they struck the stone. As Gazroth landed with a deafening thud, a wave of demonic energy surged through the chamber, knocking the companions to the ground. The sheer force of his presence was suffocating, and for a moment it felt as though the chamber itself recoiled from his power. "Mortals," Gazroth sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, "did you truly believe you could stand against me, against the inevitable tide of the Nine Hells?" Drea scrambled to her feet, clutching the portal stones tightly. She could feel their energy intensify, responding to Gazroth's presence. "You're wrong, Gazroth," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "This portal will not consume our world, not while we stand." The devil laughed, a cruel, resonant sound that echoed off the cavern walls. "Your defiance amuses me, but it changes nothing. This realm will burn, and you will die screaming." Gumus, his shield raised and sword gleaming, stepped forward to face the monstrous devil. "Enough talk, Gazroth. Let's finish this." The battle erupted with explosive ferocity. Gazroth dismounted in a fluid motion, his massive scimitar slicing through the air as he charged at Gumus. The warrior raised his shield just in time, sparks flying as the blade clashed against it. The force of the blow sent him skidding backward, but he held his ground, gritting his teeth against the pain radiating through his arm. Arkin, moving with the speed of a shadow, darted to the side, his twin blades flashing as he targeted Gazroth's flank. The devil was faster than he looked, parrying Arkin's strikes with alarming ease. A sweep of Gazroth's tail sent Arkin sprawling, the jagged spikes tearing through his armor. Drea, standing at the edge of the fray, focused her magic. Her hands crackled with electricity as she unleashed a barrage of lightning bolts at Gazroth. The energy struck him squarely in the chest, forcing him to stagger. But rather than faltering, he roared in fury, his wings unfurling as he launched a counterattack. A wave of hellfire surged from his outstretched hand, consuming everything in its path. Drea conjured a shield of arcane energy just in time, but the force of the attack sent her to her knees. The portal stones glowed brighter, their heat searing her skin as if urging her to act. "Keep him busy," she shouted, her voice strained. "I need time to disrupt the portal." Gumus and Arkin redoubled their efforts, coordinating their strikes to keep Gazroth off balance. Gumus's shield absorbed another devastating blow, and Arkin's blades found purchase, carving deep gashes into the devil's armor. But Gazroth was relentless, his scimitar a whirlwind of destruction, his every movement imbued with otherworldly power. Meanwhile, Drea approached the altar, her mind racing as she analyzed the intricate runes carved into its surface. The portal stones pulsed in her hands, their energy resonating with the ritual's dark magic. Closing her eyes, she reached out with her magic, channeling the stone's power. The room seemed to react violently to her actions. The portal roared, its tendrils of fire and shadow lashing out wildly. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the air grew heavy with the scent of ozone. Gazroth, sensing her intent, turned his attention toward her. "No," he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. With a powerful beat of his wings, he surged toward her, his scimitar raised to strike. But Gumus intercepted him, slamming into the devil with all his might. "You're not getting past me," he growled, his voice fierce. Arkin, bloodied but unyielding, joined the fray, his blades striking in a flurry of precise, relentless attacks. Together they held Gazroth at bay, buying Drea the precious moments she needed. The stones in her hands blazed with light as she channeled their power into the altar, disrupting the flow of energy feeding the portal. The runes on the altar began to flicker and fade, and the vortex's roar turned into a shriek of protest. "We're running out of time," Drea shouted. "I need just a little longer." Gazroth let out a furious roar, his strength redoubling as he fought to break free from Gumus and Arkin's onslaught. The chamber trembled, the very walls seeming to crack under the strain of the battle. But despite the chaos, the trio held firm. Together they stood against the tide of darkness, their resolve unshaken as the portal's energy began to falter. The fate of their world hung by a thread, but their courage burned brighter than ever. Chapter 6. The Battle with Gazroth. The chamber descended into chaos as Gazroth's fury reverberated like thunder, each of his strikes a storm of fire and shadow. The monstrous devil, clad in obsidian armor, loomed like a nightmare incarnate, his movements unnaturally swift for his massive size. His steed, wreathed in flickering hellfire, pawed the ground, its fiery breath scorching the air with each exhale. Gumus, battered but unbroken, pushed himself off the wall, his shield arm trembling from the impact of Gazroth's infernal assault. His vision blurred, and blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, but his resolve remained unshaken. With a guttural roar, he charged back into the fray, swinging his sword with all the strength he could muster. Their weapons met with a clash that echoed throughout the chamber, sparks flying as steel clashed against enchanted scimitar. Gazroth's laughter boomed, mocking Gumus's tenacity. "You think you can stand against me, mortal? You are nothing but dust before the power of the 9 hells." Gumus gritted his teeth, ignoring the taunts. His blade moved with precision, exploiting the smallest gaps in Gazroth's armor. The devil snarled as Gumus's strikes began to bite deeper, but his retaliation was brutal. With a backhanded swing, Gazroth sent Gumus sprawling, his shield skidding across the chamber floor. Meanwhile, Drea fought to maintain her focus. Her trembling hands guided the portal stones, the artifacts pulsating with unstable energy as she continued the intricate ritual to disrupt the portal. The vortex roared in protest, its tendrils lashing out violently, threatening to consume everything in its path. But the chaotic energy within the chamber made controlling the stones a Herculean task. Sweat dripped down Drea's brow as she struggled to channel their power, her heart pounding in rhythm with their erratic pulses. She could feel the portal resisting her efforts, as though it were a sentient force battling to remain open. Arkin, despite his exhaustion, refused to falter. He darted between swarms of lesser devils, his blades a blur as he cut down one foe after another. The air around him reeked of burning flesh and sulfur as he moved with deadly precision. Each kill brought him closer to Drea, who was vulnerable amidst the chaos. "Hold the line, Drea," he shouted, his voice strained. "We've come too far to fail now." But Gazroth had other plans. Sensing Drea's growing control over the portal, he turned his baleful gaze toward her. "You dare meddle in my designs?" he roared, his voice a tempest of rage. He spurred his steed forward, the monstrous creature galloping straight toward Drea with malevolent intent. Drea froze, the cold grip of fear wrapping around her heart as the hellish steed closed the distance. Her concentration faltered, the ritual wavering as the portal stones dimmed for a brief, terrifying moment. "No!" Arkin's voice cut through the chaos. Summoning the last of his strength, he hurled himself in front of Drea, his blades crossed in defiance. Gazroth's steed reared, its flaming hooves slamming into the ground with an ear-splitting crack. "You'll not touch her!" Arkin bellowed, his determination unyielding. He lashed out with a flurry of strikes, his blades carving into the steed's fiery hide. The creature howled in pain, its flames sputtering as it reared back. But Gazroth, enraged by the interference, raised his scimitar high. With a brutal swing, he unleashed a blast of infernal energy that sent Arkin flying. The scout's body slammed into the chamber wall with a sickening crunch before crumpling to the ground, motionless. Drea let out a choked cry, her heart shattering at the sight of her fallen friend. The portal stones in her hands began to pulse erratically, their energy threatening to spiral out of control. "No more!" she screamed, her voice filled with a fury that matched Gazroth's. A surge of raw magic erupted from within her, the portal stones responding to her anger. They glowed with blinding light as Drea channeled their power, the chaotic energy within them bending to her will. The chamber trembled as the stones resonated with the portal, their harmonic vibrations destabilizing the vortex. Gazroth, sensing the shift in power, still mounted on his steed and advanced on Drea. His massive form loomed over her, his scimitar raised to deliver a killing blow. "You will not succeed," he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. But before he could strike, Gumus, battered and bloodied, hurled himself at the devil. With a roar of defiance, he drove his sword into Gazroth's side, the blade piercing through his enchanted armor. Gazroth howled in pain, turning his wrath toward the warrior who dared to defy him. "Drea, now!" Gumus shouted, his voice ragged. With tears streaming down her face, Drea focused all her energy on the portal stones. The air around her crackled with power as the stones synchronized with the portal's chaotic energy. She could feel the stones draining her strength, but she pushed forward, pouring everything she had into the ritual. The vortex let out a deafening shriek as the stone's energy collided with its own. The portal began to collapse in on itself, its fiery tendrils retracting as its connection to the nine hells was severed. Gazroth, weakened but still dangerous, lashed out in desperation. He struck Gumus with a backhanded blow, sending him sprawling across the chamber. The devil staggered toward Drea, his fury incandescent. Chapter 7. The Turning Point. Gazroth's triumphant sneer twisted into a mask of shock and fury as Drea's spell tore through the chamber. The energy she unleashed was unlike anything she had ever summoned before, a tempest born of desperation and raw emotion. The crackling storm filled the chamber with blinding light and deafening thunder, bolts of searing lightning raining down with unrelenting fury. The first strike hit Gazroth square in the chest, the force of the impact driving him backward, his armor cracking under the sheer intensity. His steed reared, letting out a hellish scream as another bolt of lightning tore through its fiery body. The beast, no longer able to endure the onslaught, disintegrated into ash, leaving Gazroth vulnerable and exposed. The demon lord roared in pain and defiance, his massive frame convulsing as tendrils of electricity danced across his body. He staggered, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. For the first time, the air of invincibility surrounding him began to waver. Gumus, watching this from the ground, felt a surge of renewed strength coursing through him. Though his body screamed in protest, he forced himself to rise. Every muscle ached, every step was agony. But the sight of Gazroth faltering reignited the warrior's resolve. "This ends now," Gumus growled, gripping his blade tightly. He broke into a charge, each step fueled by a burning determination to end the nightmare that had claimed so many lives. Gazroth turned, his glowing eyes narrowing as he saw the warrior closing in. He raised a clawed hand to strike, but another bolt of lightning arced down from the storm Drea had unleashed, hitting him in the shoulder and causing his arm to spasm uncontrollably. The opening was all Gumus needed. With a battle cry that echoed through the chamber, Gumus leaped, his blade aimed at the fragile leathery wings that had carried Gazroth to power. The sword struck true, tearing through the sinew and bone of the demon's left wing. A horrifying screech erupted from Gazroth's throat as he stumbled, his body pitching forward. Drea, still channeling the storm, felt her strength beginning to wane. Her vision blurred, her knees trembling as the raw power coursing through her began to take its toll. But she held firm, her hands glowing with residual magic as she directed the storm's final bursts toward Gazroth. The demon lord, now grounded and writhing in agony, clawed at the ground in a desperate attempt to rise. His once majestic wings hung in tatters, and his massive frame trembled with each labored breath. He tried to summon another wave of infernal energy, but his strength was waning. "Drea!" Gumus shouted, turning to her as he planted his sword into the ground to steady himself. "Finish him!" Drea nodded, summoning the last reserves of her power. Her fear and exhaustion faded as a sense of clarity and purpose took hold. She raised her hands, the portal stones she had been clutching now glowing faintly, their energy nearly spent. With one final incantation, she unleashed a concentrated bolt of lightning directly at Gazroth's chest. The strike hit with a force that shook the chamber, the energy cascading over Gazroth's form and illuminating the entire room. The demon lord let out one last deafening roar before his body crumpled, his armor and flesh disintegrating under the sheer power of Drea's magic. For a moment, silence reigned. The storm dissipated, leaving behind the acrid smell of ozone and the faint hum of fading magic. Drea collapsed to her knees, her breath ragged, her hands trembling from the effort. Gumus staggered toward her, his armor dented and bloodied, but his expression one of awe and gratitude. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. From the shadows, a groan signaled Arkin's recovery. The scout, bruised but alive, limped over to join them. He looked down at the scorched remains of Gazroth, then at Drea. "Remind me never to doubt you again," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Drea managed a weak laugh, her exhaustion overtaking her. "I couldn't have done it alone," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The trio stood together amidst the ruins of the chamber, their victory hard-fought and bitter-sweet. Though they had triumphed, the cost had been great, and the scars of the battle would linger. But for now they allowed themselves a moment of respite, knowing they had turned the tide against the darkness threatening their world. Chapter 8. The Sealing of the Portal. With Gazroth incapacitated, Drea knelt before the swirling vortex, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her mind razor-sharp with determination. The portal stones in her hands pulsed rhythmically, their light syncing with the chaotic energies of the portal. She could feel their power resonating with her own, a connection forged in the crucible of battle. Taking a deep breath, she began the final incantation. Her voice, though weak, carried the weight of her will. The ancient words of the spell reverberated through the chamber, their power amplifying with each syllable. The air grew thick with magic, crackling with energy as the stones responded to her command. The swirling vortex of fire and darkness started to change. The flames flickered and dimmed, the shadows within it writhing in protest. Slowly, painfully slowly, the portal began to shrink, its chaotic energy calming as if subdued by an unseen force. The room was bathed in an otherworldly glow, the stones in Drea's hands shining brighter than ever before. Gazroth, his broken form sprawled across the chamber floor, watched in fury as his carefully laid plans unraveled before his eyes. With a roar that echoed through the crumbling walls, he clawed at the ground, dragging himself forward despite his injuries. "You dare defy me?" he bellowed, his voice laced with both rage and desperation. "You think this will stop me? I am eternal. I will return, and your world will burn." His threats hung in the air, but Drea didn't falter. She pushed through the pain, her focus unshaken. The portal stones, now glowing with an intense, almost blinding light, reached their peak resonance. With one final word of power, Drea thrust them toward the vortex. A deafening boom filled the chamber as the portal's chaotic energies collapsed inward. The flames were extinguished in an instant, the oppressive darkness vanishing as though it had never been. The air, once thick with heat and sulfur, became still and eerily silent. The portal was gone. The backlash of energy sent Drea sprawling to the ground, her strength finally giving out. The stones, now inert, rolled from her hands and clattered against the cold stone floor. She lay there, her chest heaving, her vision swimming as exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Gazroth let out a final, guttural roar, his voice fading into a rasp as his body slumped. Though he remained a looming threat, his immediate power was broken. His connection to the Nine Hells severed. He was no longer a conduit for their destructive forces. Arkin groaned as he pushed himself up from the rubble where he had landed. His head throbbed and his body ached, but he was alive. Blinking through the haze of pain, he looked around the chamber. What? What happened? Drea turned her head toward him, a weak but triumphant smile breaking across her face. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The portal is sealed." Gumus, battered but resolute, hobbled toward them. His armor was cracked, his sword chipped, but his spirit was unbroken. He surveyed the quiet chamber, the absence of the portal's malevolent energy filling him with a rare sense of hope. "We stopped him," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. For now. The three companions sat in the stillness, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the weight of their victory sank in. They had faced overwhelming odds, battled forces that sought to consume their world, and emerged victorious. Yet they knew this was but a single victory in a war that was far from over. As Drya slowly rose to her feet, she gathered the now dormant portal stones and placed them in her satchel. Their faint glow was a reminder of the power they held, a power that could both protect and destroy. She slung the satchel over her shoulder and looked at her companions. "We've bought the world time," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But Gazroth's defeat won't stop the forces of darkness. They'll regroup, and they'll come for us again." Arkin nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Then we'll be ready," he said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Gumus placed a hand on Drea's shoulder, his grip firm despite his weariness. "We've faced worse and survived. Together, we'll see this through." As they emerged from the fort, the crimson sky began to fade, replaced by the first hints of dawn. The air, though still heavy with the aftermath of battle, carried a sense of renewal. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. The portal stones in Drea's satchel glimmered faintly, a lingering reminder of the sealed gateway and the dangers that still lurked beyond it. Their journey was far from over, but for now they allowed themselves a brief moment of peace, knowing they had fought to protect their world, and won. Epilogue. The Echo of the Portal. The air outside the fort was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere within. Yet, as the heroes breathed it in, a sense of unease lingered. They had defeated Gazroth, sealed the portal, and saved the world from impending doom. But victory tasted bittersweet. Drea, clutching the satchel containing the portal stones, felt a strange sensation. The stones, usually inert, were pulsing faintly, emitting a low hum that resonated deep within her. It was as if the portal, though sealed, still echoed within them, a faint tremor in the fabric of reality. Arkin, his senses always alert, sensed the same anomaly. "The stones, they're reacting," he said, his voice grave. "There's still a connection to the portal, a residual energy." Gumus, ever the pragmatist, tried to dismiss their concerns. "Perhaps it's just residual magic. Nothing to worry about." But Drea knew better. The stones, once conduits of chaotic energy, now throbbed with a strange, unsettling rhythm. It was as if the portal, though closed, still existed on another plane, a phantom limb that twitched with unseen forces. As they journeyed away from the fort, the pulsing intensified. The stones grew warm, then hot, radiating an eerie glow that illuminated the surrounding forest. Drea felt a strange pull, an invisible force tugging at her, urging her to return to the fort, to investigate the source of the disturbance. Arkin, sensing her unease, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Drea. We always do." But as they looked back at the distant silhouette of the fort, now shrouded in an unnatural twilight, they knew that their battle against the forces of darkness was far from over. The echoes of the portal and the lingering power of the stones promised new challenges, new dangers, and a future filled with uncertainty. The fate of the world, they realized, was inextricably linked to the fate of these enigmatic stones, and their journey, once a quest for survival, had now transformed into a lifelong struggle to unravel the mysteries of the sealed portal and the forces that sought to reopen it.